Number one would be scope. This is easily the most important aspect of this whole video. Scope is the art of judging how much you can do based on your time and skill limits. When coming up with your game idea, think small, then think even smaller. That's the game you should make. Push the limits of how much you can trim off features of your game while still retaining what makes it fun. Number two would be the length of your game. I'll go into more details in the next section because it really depends on the type of game that you're going to make. But just as a general rule of thumb, try to make your game fully playable in a reasonable time frame. Make sure that when your players play your game, that they'll be able to get the full experience. Number three, this is purely subjective, but I always see these three types of game do really well in game jams. I'll refer to them as game A, B, and C. Game A is an arcade style game. This could be misleading and make you think that it needs to fit the art style and gameplay of 80s arcade games, but it really does not. It's usually either a game about reflexes and speed, where you have to get a high score, or a puzzle game with multiple levels. This type of game usually have no story, or very little, maybe a quick introduction at the beginning. In my opinion, if it's your first game jam, this is the best type of game to make because you can get away with making a single screen and focus on a few interesting game mechanics. Game B is centered around a short story with limited gameplay elements. It's important that the game isn't just dialogues and that it also has minimal game mechanics that are fun or clever. Otherwise, you're not exploiting the video game medium and it's just a visual novel. You should aim for a 10 to 20 minute long story. How much your game revolves around the story or the gameplay is up to you, but keep in mind that if you go in one direction, the more you should peel back on the other. And finally, game C is more specific to local game jams that you attend in person rather than online ones. This one is what I call the versus type game. They usually involve having two players go against each other. This type usually impresses judges because mainstream versus game tend to be always revolve around the same mechanics, and it's really easy to think outside the box with this one. But of course, you need two people playing at the same time, so if it's an online game jam, maybe not the best idea. Alright, tip number 4, play to your strength. Yes, game jams are a great opportunity to try something new, and personally, every game jam that I attend, I try to do something that's outside of my comfort zone. However, for most of it, I try to do things that I already know what to do. The goal here is to finish a good game quickly and have a good time. Tip number 5, cut corners. You don't have to care about your code not being the cleanest or the fastest. Of course, you should still try to code to the best of your ability, but you don't have to put in place whole scalable systems for later on. You can just focus on making the thing work. Don't feel bad about using existing character controllers, for example, to save time, or if your team is lacking someone that is good at making a heart, it's perfectly okay to go and grab existing assets. Again, the goal here is to have a good finished product. And finally, last but not least, leave yourself some time to debug, polish, and release your game. I see way too many people submitting their game minutes away from the deadline. Don't do that to yourself. You don't need that kind of stress in your life. If you got to that point, that's probably because your scope was too large and you needed to cut some features. I usually give myself a whole 10 hours for this part, and it might seem like a lot of time. But the truth is, I find that polish really goes a long way, and people enjoy having a polished product. It makes them feel like they're not playing a janky prototype, but an actual polished product. And also, there's nothing worse than your players getting stuck because of a bug.